Beneath a sky unmarked by smoke or stone, clans of hunters and gatherers moved like living constellations across the earth. Their footsteps were light upon the grasses, their voices carried in the dawn wind songs of survival, laments for the chase, murmurs of hope. In that vast wilderness, the world felt boundless, a tapestry of forests, rivers, and sunlit plains stretching beyond the eye's reach. Seasons came and went. Harsh winters glazed the land with frost. Summers melted rivers into silver ribbons. And through each turning of the wheel, these small bands followed the herds, gathered the fruits and nuts of wild trees, and huddled together beneath nights ablaze with stars. Yet beneath the rhythm of seasons, a new pulse began to stir. Some among them noticed fields of tall grasses where the seed heads hung heavy, spilling golden grains when brushed by wind or foot. A child kicked loose a handful of kernels that tumbled across the earth, and in that simple scattering lay the ember of a dream. They gathered the stray grains and tasted their brittle sweetness. It was unlike the chewy roots and bitter leaves. They knew a promise of nourishment captured in a tiny husk. Elders spoke of dreams that same night. Visions of endless fields rippling beneath the sun, stalks bending under abundance, baskets overflowing. In the fire's glow, voices rose in wonder. Could the land itself be taught to yield? Imagine a woman kneeling in the dirt, her fingers brushing the soil's secret folds as she pressed those stray grains into the earth. Seed by seed, she created a pattern, an offering, and an experiment. Around her, the clan watched in silence as she coaxed life from the ground with a gesture born of faith and curiosity. That first planting was tentative, almost accidental. Some grains were lost to birds or rodents. Some failed to sprout. Yet, against all odds, green shoots emerged, slender ribbons of life unfurling toward the light. The clan gathered again. Astonished laughter, careful tasting of the new leaves, prayers offered to sky and earth. A simple act of transformation had taken place. Wild became nurtured, and with it came a shift in the human heart. No longer entirely at the mercy of migration, the people imagined a future anchored to place. The dream of permanence pressed itself into their minds like a stone into clay. What if they could shape the land as they shaped their tools? What if the generosity of fields could sustain more than the wandering flame of the hunt? In that moment, a new desire awakened, an impulse to create, to build, to ritualize the sacred partnership between human and grain. The old songs adapted, new verses honored the seed, the plow, the turning of soil. Elders recited names for the spirits of the wild wheat, invoking their blessing in soft chants before the planting season. Every gathering of berries, every harvest of roots took on fresh significance, echoes of the greater feast to come. As the clan returned to their camps, the fields whispered behind them in the dusk breeze. Those whispers carried a promise that one day stone and timber would rise, where now only grasses swayed, that lines of walls and granaries would mark the boundary between human effort and the limitless wild. The dream had taken root not only of bread and abundance, but of civilization itself. And so the first stirrings of that great dream breathed life into the earth, marking the passage from wandering to dwelling, from mere survival to the art of living. In the soft murmur of sprouting blades lay the seed of cities, of temples, of laws, and kingsicos of a future born where imagination met the wild. They say a single grain can carry the weight of worlds, and in that fragile kernel lay the spark of human wonder. Under dawn's pale light, hunters paused as they followed a herd into a valley of grasses. At first, it seemed like any other patch of wild wheat stalks whispering with the breeze. Rachis is heavy with untamed seeds. Yet among those drifting stems, an elder spotted something different, a cluster of plump grains, larger than any she'd tasted before, glinting like sunlit beads against the green. Curiosity bent her stooped form as she knelt to gather those golden pearls. She held them close, turning them in her rough palm, tracing the fine ridges that marked each kernel's promise. The clan watched in silence, breath caught between wonder and skepticism. For millennia, they had consumed the earth's offerings as they found them. To think of planting, of steering nature's hand, was both thrilling and terrifying. That night, around the crackling fire, dreams took on the flavor of those seeds. Children spoke of fields endless as the sky, waves of grain sweeping the horizons. Adults dreamed of baskets that never emptied, of bellies full long after the hunt had ceased. In the ember glow, voices wove tales of earth spirits smiling upon simple hearts delighted by the offering of human care. In the hush that followed storytelling, a younger woman dared to speak. What if we sow these grains ourselves? What if we guide their journey from seed to stalk? The murmur that rose was not of disapproval but of cautious hope. Imagine a world where harvest need not depend on random chance, where the land could be persuaded to give more than it once had. Before dawn broke, small hands carried those precious kernels into loamy soil along the riverbank. Rows were drawn with a pointed stick, 3 short lines, then a pause, another 3 echoing the ancient symbol of continuity in their cave paintings. A prayer was uttered for each cluster, a tribute to the spirit of growth, a plea for rain, a promise of gratitude. Days passed in silent vigil. Dawnlight revealed nothing but Earth's flat expanse and the clan's restless feet. Then one morning a trembling finger pointed to the soil, a flush of green, slender as a reed, pushing through the dark. A cheer rose, low at first, then erupting like thunder across the valley. Hands reached out to touch those young shoots, as though feeling the pulse of life itself. From that moment, imagination took wing. Elders spoke of grain as a gift too precious to be left to wild whim. They began to map the river's floodplain, noting where water seeped deep and where sun beat fiercest. They devised rudimentary calendar stones, arranged to mark the solstice and equinoxo, that planting would align with sky's rhythms. Myths coalesced around their new practice. In whispered hymns, they praised the Grain Mother, a gentle deity who slumbered beneath the earth and awoke when offered song and seed. Each stalk was thought to bear her blessing, each harvest her bounty. Festivals emerged, barefoot processions over furrowed fields, painted bodies swaying in time with drumbeats that mimicked the heartbeat of the land. In the world of imagination, boundaries blurred. The fields became living temples. The simple act of sowing was transformed into a sacred covenant. Tools of bone and wood were kissed with ochre before use. Grain kernels were placed in children's hair as charms to ensure fertility of both soil and spirit. Trade followed vision. A neighboring clan returned one day, bearing rare stones in exchange for a sack of seed. They spoke of lands where seeds had multiplied beyond measure, fields so vast they rivaled the sunlit plains of the sky. Tales spread like wildfire, carried by travelers who marveled at this union of human creativity and nature's generosity. Yet in every tale lay a lesson. Imagination could birth miracles, but required stewardship. The clans learned to rotate plots, allowing soil to rest, to collect grain only after telling her stories once more, renewing the bond between seed and sower. In this interplay of myth and method, humanity discovered its capacity to reshape the world and its responsibility to tend what it had conceived. Thus, the seed of imagination grew into a forest of possibility, What began as a curious taste of wild grain blossomed into rituals, calendars, and covenants that bound people to the land. In the turning of those first fertile kernels lay the blueprint for civilization, a dream sown in earth, watered by hope, and harvested in the collective heartbeat of humankind. A ring of stones rises from the plain, like ancient Sentin Elsek pillar carved with winding snakes, horned beasts, and hovering vultures. Here stands Göbekli Tepe, the first dream made real in stone. Dawn's first light paints the pillars in pale gold. Crafted long before pottery, before the wheel, these megaliths were hauled from quarries miles away, each monolith set upright by hands, guided more by vision than by tool. No homes cluster nearby, only the vast sweep of wild grasses and the distant thunder of migrating herds. Imagine the first worshiper climbing the gentle mound, lungs burning with each step. As they emerge atop the summit, the carvings loom overhead, spirals that draw the eye inward, figures that seem to shift as clouds drift across the sky. The air here tastes of dust and potential, a thin sweetness carried on a breeze that whispers of gatherings yet to come. By moonlight, terraces filled with people chanting in low unison. Torches glimmered against stone faces, casting dancing shadows that brought beasts to life. Each pillar formed a gate through which pilgrims passed, stepping from the chaos of living into the ordered space of ritual. Fires burned in shallow pits, sending spirals of smoke into the stars, while drums tapped a heartbeat that echoed across valley and plain. No written words survive from that time, only the language of stone and sweat. Yet in those carvings and gatherings, a new covenant was forged. Humanity would suspend its wanderings to build a place for the sacred. Here, at the world's edge, they proclaimed their intention to shape the divine as they shaped the land. As seasons turned, the builders returned again and again. They added new rings of pillars, each larger than the last, each more intricately carved. The quarry's rain-slicked stones became canvases for myths, the serpent swallowing its tail, the crane lifting a lifeless figure towards sky, the fox crouching at the threshold between worlds. In this temple on the horizon, the dream took on flesh. People began to settle in its shadow, carving homes into nearby hillsides, planting fields at its base. The great gatherings spawned patterns of life festivals to mark planting and harvest. Alliances formed around shared feasts, stories rewritten each year to honor the temple's origin. With every added pillar, the vision grew clearer. A civilization built not on conquest, but on communion. The megaliths spoke of a people who dreamed of gods drawn by attention, who built stone altars bigger than any one clan could inhabit, and who believed that if they carved their myths into the earth, those myths would shape their destiny. Yet the temple's purpose remained partly hidden even to its creators. No central shrine crowned the summit, only concentric rings that seemed to invite questioning rather than dictate doctrine. The dream was not of uniformity, but of shared mystery, each pillar a verse in a cosmic hymn, each carving a doorway into wonder. Today, when archaeologists uncover a new pillar, they find it broken and buried, intentionally laid to rest, as though the builders chose to close that chapter of their dream. The mound grew higher with centuries of devotion, then fell silent, its secret order sealed beneath millennia of soil. And as you stand before these weathered stones, you feel the echo of that first dream toe gather, to carve, to consecrate. The temple on the horizon remains a testament to the moment when imagination and stone conspired to birth civilization itself. It reminds us that before cities and scripts, before kings and armies, humans first laid a cornerstone of belief. and built from it a world that would never be the same. Long before grand plows carved furrows across continents, the earliest farmers knelt beside the earth with trembling hands, learning to treat the soil as both altar and partner. In those first fields, cultivation was not mere labor, it was ritual, a sacred covenant between human and land. Under a dawn sky still staining from night's loom, clans gathered at the field's edge. Elders raised flaxen wicks dyed with ochre to anoint the first furrow. The rich promise of the soil, dark as a raven's wing, gleamed with each stroke of the planting stick. Children watched with wide eyes as kernels of grain seeds of wheat, barley, einkorn were laid in neat rows, pressed by gentle heels and blessed with whispered invocations to the spirits of growth. In time, the act of tilling became a dance. One clan's song carried the rhythm of the oxen's shoulders as they drew wooden plows, each turning of the blade accompanied by a chorus of voices calling out the names of ancestral harvests. Mothers wove garlands of wildflowers to hang on the plow's yoke, paying tribute to the unseen forces that coaxed life from the soil. Each field was thus sanctified before a single seed met its fate below the surface. At midday, the heat rippled across the ripening stalks. Offerings were made to the sun, god crumbs of flatbread smeared with honey, libations of fermented barley beer poured into hollowed gourds. Those libations soaked into the earth around the seeds, symbolic gifts to the grain mother who held life in her gentle hands. Songs rose and fell in steady cadences, each verse marking a prayer for rain, for protection against locusts, for the strength to see the ritual through. As the seasons turned and the stalks rose high, the fields themselves became sacred spaces. Pathways were carved between rows, not wide enough for carts, but perfect for procession. Priests and priestesses walked these paths in ceremonial cloaks, dyed with indigo and saffron, pausing at intervals to trace symbols in the dust signs, meant to guide the spirits of fertility along their appointed course. Beneath each mark, small pits held offerings of eggshell, fragments of bone, bits of autumn's fallen nuts. When harvest approached, the villages stilled. No games were played, no hunts were pursued. Families gathered sickles of polished flint, their handles wrapped in leather and tied with reed cords. Before the first cut, a lone woman stepped forward, her hair braided with kernels of ripening wheat. She uttered a prayer that rose like smoke over the field. "Harvest me gently, O earth, for I provide your bounty. I offer my labor that your gift may feed the living." At her signal, 1,000 sickles bit into stalk and stem. The air filled with the sound of falling grain, a soft cascade like rain upon a rooftop panned, the scent of ripeness, heady and warm. Baskets woven from reeds filled quickly, each basket another treasure of color and texture, golden stalks bursting through their rims. Young men tripped over their own eagerness, scattering kernels as they wove through the rows. Elders stooped with calm reverence, gathering only one handful at a time. Once the last stalk lay upon the earth, the harvesters danced in a ring around the central sheaf-an upright bundle bound with red cord, representing the union of human effort and divine favor. Drums beat a slow pulse. Horns blew notes that echoed across the open plains. Voices called out names of past harvests, weaving history into the present moment. They feasted on flatbreads baked from that morning's grain, sharing morsels as offerings to one another, sealing the bond of community born of shared toil. Then came the time of storage and reflection. Granarious simple structures of mud brick or timber, lined with clay, received the newly threshed grain. As each bin filled, so too did the clan's sense of security. Walls rose around these storehouses, not as defenses against human foes, but as sanctuaries against hunger and want. Priests inscribed the walls with tally marks, recording this season's bounty alongside the years of plenty and scarcity alike. In those marks lay both accounting and prophecy. They clothed the future in ritual. When next spring arrived, the clan would return to the fields, guided by those same tally marks and the ever-turning cycle. Kernel by kernel, seed by seed, the partnership between humans and earth deepened. Cultivation was no longer a mere act of survival, but a sacred dance of creation, each movement steeped in reverence, each harvest a renewal of faith. And so, in humble fields under changing skies, the seeds of civilization were sown. Not in grand palaces or mighty armies, but in the quiet devotion of hands pressing grain into soil, in the songs offered to sun and rain, and in the shared joy of sustenance born from ritual. Civilization grew from that partnership, rooted in the sacred communion between human and land, nourished by the ever-present dream that whispered, "Together, we will rise." In the cradle of the river's flow, humankind first tasted the alchemy of abundance, transforming trickles into torrents, marshes into plains, and drifting camps into bustling towns. Water became both lifeblood and currency, its paths carved by ingenuity and ambition. Along the Tigris and Euphrates, wide canals branched from the mother rivers like arteries, guiding life-giving currents toward thirsty fields. Men and women stood knee-deep in cool water at dawn, prodding earth walls with sharpened reeds, shaping channels that fed crops beyond the wild floodplain. The soil drank greedily, green shoots erupting in ordered rows where only reeds and rushes had grown before. Wooden gate-simple planks bound with leather straps rose and fell at each branching canal, controlled by wooden winches and human hands. With every turn of the lever, water's will bowed to human design, a flood diverted here, a drought averted there. The hum of spinning gears became the song of civilization, its harmonies carried aloft on drifting mist and mirage. As water flowed, so too did wealth. Grain surpluses piled behind mud brick walls, stacked in lofty silos that glittered under the midday sun. Those walls 12 feet high, their tops crenellated like fortress ramparts, protected more than stores of barley and wheat. They defended entire communities, drawing merchants from distant deserts and mountains with promises of trade. Stone jetties extended into canals like pierce platforms, where boatmen unloaded sacks of grain in exchange for metal knives, ivory beads, or fine textiles. On riverbanks, shrines dedicated to water spirits rose on terraces, their steps worn smooth by pilgrims who poured oil into hidden wells as offerings for steady currents and gentle rains. Cities took shape where walls overlooked waterways. Straight streets crossed at right angles, their lines traced by surveyors using knotted ropes and wooden stakes. At the heart of each settlement stood the citadel, a raised mound of clay and cobble its summit, guarded by stout walls pierced only by a single gate. From that vantage, priests watched the irrigation networks pulse like veins, calling for repairs or expansions with the authority of rain gods. In the dry season, reservoirs held trickles back, storing life in vast cisterns lined with bitumen and stone. Children dipped clay bowls into those silent pools, drawing water that tasted of promise and patience. Elders recited hymns to Enki, the subterranean waters lord, invoking his aid to ward off salinity and disease. In the glow of evening torches, they carved symbols of fish and waves into mud brick wall sigils, meant to bind water's bounty forever within their walls. But water could be fickle. In years when rains failed upstream, canals shrank to muddy threads and silos groaned with emptiness. Walls offered little comfort when hunger gnawed at the gates. Thus, wealth was not measured only in grain, but in the mastery of flow. How deftly engineers could raise new dikes, dig deeper wells, or reroute currents to parched lands. Beyond practical labor, water shaped myth and ceremony. Festivals marked the spring inundation. Masked dancers performed on floating barges beneath arched gateways, reenacting the cosmic battle between sea and earth. At night, priests kindled braziers along embankments, their smoke drifting across black water like prayers carried by unseen currents. Families gathered on riverbanks, sharing bread and beer, chanting blessings until the moon dipped low and the mirrored surface trembled with laughter. In time, the mastery of water became the measure of power. Kings inscribed their names on stelae set at canal junctions, proclaiming, "I diverted the river, I nourished the people." These proclamations stood for centuries, though, over countless seasons. The river itself carved new paths, reclaiming fields and burying walls in shifting silt. Yet from that dynamic give and take emerged the first city-states, bound by walls and river alike. Water, once capricious, became a covenanta pact between human hands and earthly flow, through canals and reservoirs, through walls that held back chaos. Our ancestors fashioned wealth not merely of grain or metal, but of civilization's enduring promise, that by shaping water, they could shape the destiny of all who followed. Next, we turn to the written word, the script of the dream that carried these ideas forward, inscribed on clay and bound in fire. Long before polished papyrus and flowing quills, the first scribes pressed styluses into clay tablets fresh from the potter's wheel. Each mark a testament to memory, promise, and power. In those early impressions lay the script of the dream itself, encoded in pictogram and wedge. At the dawn of writing, merchants stood in courtyard markets, clay tablet in hand, voice resonant with the day's ledger. 30 measures of barley this morning, 12 more to be delivered at dusk. The stylus cut into wet clay, leaving behind a cuneiform tally that would outlast the fugitive flourish of speech. Traders passed those tablets along dusty roads, their edges chipped, but their contents evergreen, carrying the dream of surplus and exchange across valleys and deserts. In temple precincts, scribes labored by oil lamp and dawn's first light. Beneath vaulted ceilings carved with spirals and rosettes, they inscribed hymns to the grain mother verses, beseeching her favor in tone and meter that resonated like song. Each tablet recorded the offerings laid before her, loaves baked in geometric forms, jars of honey, drunk beer, sheep and oxen marked for sacrifice. Through their precise strokes, they wove the sacred story of harvest into the permanence of clay. But writing was more than record-keeping, it was the alchemy of thought. In city halls, legal codes were unrolled in stone. If a man builds a house and it collapses, killing the owner, that builder shall be put to death. Those words, once chiseled, bound the community together under shared rules, a covenant between ruler and ruled, written not in shifting shadow, but in enduring monument. Script forged authority. Kings summoned scribes to compose their names and titles in larger-than-life inscriptions on massive stelae. In the center of Uruk's Temple Plaza, a grand stele stood tall. Its surface bristled with signs reading, "Gilgamesh, whose strength is unmatched, builder of walls, conqueror of dream and dusk." Pilgrims paused to trace those signs with reverent fingertips, affirming the ruler's role as steward of both city and divine will. The script also carried prophecy. Oracles carved omens onto tablets, interpreting the silent language of stars and flights of birds. Priests consulted these texts in hushed chambers, their soft voices translating divine patterns into human counsel. If rains fall on the seventh moon, the harvest shall be plentiful. If flocks birth twins, the land shall prosper. In that way, writing became a bridge from mortal uncertainty to celestial order. Every schoolhouse echoed with the scratch of stylus against clay. Apprentices learned to draw the simplest pictographs: wheat stalk, river bend, ox's head, before progressing to the complex sequences that conveyed abstract ideas: justice, covenant, soul. In the repetition of practice tablets, they internalized the script of civilization, carrying its forms in muscle memory as they prepared to shape the world on fresh blanks. Then came the first archives. Room upon vaulted room held tablets stacked on benches, administrative logs, ritual hymns, administrative logs, again layer upon layer of accumulated dream. Archaeologists now uncover these troves: catalogs of sheep, lists of priests, verses dedicated to the moon god Nana. In each fragment lies a piece of that ancient ambition: to fix the ephemeral in the permanence of script, to make thoughts concrete, and through them to make civilization possible. Yet writing bore its own risks. Mistaken marks could upend contracts. Stolen tablets threatened property and reputation. Cities employed guard scribes who sealed archives behind wooden vaults, marking outer doors with the wedge for seal, two intersecting lines that signified the inviolable. And when invaders swept through lands, one of their first acts was to smash tablets, erase scripts, obliterate the dreams inscribed upon walls. Still, the script endured. Clay rebounded from flame to stone. Impressions survived flood and fire. Distant generations deciphered the wedge's angles and brought voices back to life. Through scribe and scholar, the dream stretched across centuries. Sits script, a time capsule carrying the hopes, laws, and prayers that had birthed the first civilization. As you imagine those ancient hands pressing stylus into clay, consider how fragile our own records remain. In written words lies the power to create worlds, to bind communities, and to dream beyond the horizon. The next chapter turns to kingship, how rulers claimed the mantle of divine stewards, sealing their rule in ceremony and covenant. Stone walls rose around the citadel like the upturned jaws of some colossal beast, guarding its heart, a throne room carved from bedrock and fear. Here, at the intersection of earth and sky, the first rulers claimed authority not merely by sword or wealth, but by sacred investiture, the covenant between king and gods that would define law, order, and destiny itself. In the hush before dawn, priests anointed the chosen with oil pressed from olives and scented with resin. Golden diadem symbols of solar favor were placed upon bowed heads. A conch shell's breath echoed through vaulted halls as the monarch drank from goblets of wine, its crimson swirl seen as both blood of the divine and lifeblood of the realm. In that moment, mortal and god became intertwined. The ruler was both servant of the gods and god among servants. Heralds proclaimed the oath, "I, custodian of earth and sky, swear to uphold Ma'at, the cosmic order. As grain cannot rise without seed, so shall my reign nourish the people." With each word, the king's breath carried the promise of fairness, prosperity, and protection. Listeners knelt, touching foreheads to dust, acknowledging him as keeper of justice and mediator between human longing and divine will. Symbols held power. The septerit's shaft, carved in spirals like the stalks of barley, served as a tangible line between heaven's decree and earth's toil. The ankh, cradled in the ruler's palm, was the promise of life to subjects and soil alike. And the carved throne, inlaid with lapis lazuli and obsidian, was more than a sciatic. was a promise that the gods themselves had shaped society's center. Inscriptions recorded the ceremony on temple walls, stylized pharaoh figures towering above diminutive supplicants, cartouches bearing the king's birth name and throne name, each letter a syllable in the covenant's liturgy. These hieroglyphs provided permanence, binding the ruler to posterity as surely as his blood bound him to the divine. But covenant demanded reciprocity. When famine struck, the people questioned the sovereign's favor with the gods. Grain stores dwindled. Oracles spoke of hidden sins. In response, kings led processions to sacred fields, wielding ceremonial sickles to harvest first sheaves by hand, an act of humility before the land that sustained them. They offered grain, oil, and cattle on temple altars, seeking forgiveness in smoke and sacrifice, reaffirming the bond that linked crown to community. Royal law codes sprang from this foundation. In the king's name, scribes etched tablets decreeing measures of justice, theft undone by payment of double, disputes over land settled by sworn testimony, promises enforced by the threat of loss of favor and excommunication from sacred rites. The monarch's word became law, but its legitimacy arose from the covenant. Without God's sanction, the edict was no more than ink on stone. Diplomacy, too, bore the mark of covenant. Envoys carried gifts lapis and cedar beams to distant lands, accompanied by clay tablets inscribed with treaties. Pacts were sealed in blood, not only of animals sacrificed, but in oaths sworn in temple courts, the divine witness to every handshake and pledged allegiance. Yet power bred challengers. Rivals rose in distant provinces, claiming alternative divine mandates. Civil war was not merely a struggle of armies, but of sacred legitimacy, each contender staging their own investiture rites, forging new covenants with competing gods, and erecting shrines to vindicate their claim. The battlefield became a theater of religion as much as of steel, for to win the war of faith was to command the heart-sand fields off the people. In quieter days, the covenant manifested in festivals. The king ritually married the land in a sacred marriage rite, his union with a high priestess symbolizing the bond between earth's fertility and celestial favor. The union granted blessing to seed and soil, reaffirming the ruler's role as both guardian and guarantor of life's cycle. Through centuries, this model of kingship and covenant spread from Sumer to Egypt, from the Indus to the Yellow River Valley, each culture weaving its own deities and rituals but preserving the core vision that a ruler's legitimacy derived not from mere lineage or conquest, but from a living contract with the divine and the land. As dynasties rose and fell, the covenant remained the cornerstone of civilization, an enduring dream that human hands, guided by divine will, might shape a society bound by justice, nourished by ritual, and held together by faith's unbreakable promise. As the towers of temple and palace rose in sun-baked stratas, a new material whispered of status and power: metal. The humblest peasants hoed fields with wooden tools. At the citadel, artisans hammered bronze into gleaming weapons, ceremonial axes, and delicate jewelry. Bronzine alloy of copper and tin became the glittering emblem of civilization's sophistication. Imagine the clamor of the smithy at dawn, hammers striking red-hot ingots, sparks flying like captive stars, bellows breathing life into trembling embers. Apprentices crouched before glowing crucibles, eyes bright with the promise of transformation. Copper ore, quarried from distant hills, arrived in caravans escorted by traders who spoke in many tongues. Tin, rarer still, came across rugged mountain passes or tempest-tossed seas. These metals, mingled in precise proportions, yielded bronze, stronger than stone, sharper than flint, and precious enough to mark the wielders as elite. Yet bronze's value extended beyond blades and axes. Priests fashioned cult statues with bronze masks that caught torchlight. Nobles drilled thin sheets to gild their hair. Merchants stamped flat ingots as proto-currency. Wherever bronze moved, trade routes formed, winding desert trails, riverine highways, and coastal sea lanes, each linking settlements hungry for the alloy's promise. Stone remained the bedrock of communal identity. Quarried limestone and basalt became architectural canvas pyramids and ziggurats, palace facades, and city walls. Stonemasons rotated between heavy mallet and delicate chisel, carving reliefs that chronicled the exploits of kings, battles won, temples consecrated, gods appeased. Those images, relief upon relief, spoke as eloquently as any written tablet, inscribing social hierarchies and shared myths into the very face of the city. Trade wove these materials into a web of interdependence. Caravanserais dotted the routes, offering shelter to laden camels and weary travelers. In the cool shadows of vaulted corridors, deals were struck. Grain exchanged for copper, textiles bartered for semi-precious stones, horses traded for pottery. Languages mingled in these hubs, creating pidgins and borrowing words for merchant, weight, and coin. Mariners too joined the network. By pulling giant cedar planks from Lebanese forests, shipwrights crafted seafaring vessels. At dawn, crews hoisted sails, catching the capricious winds to cross blue expanses. They landed in foreign port Cyprus, Crete, Dilmun bringing bronze tools, pottery styles, and new deities to distant shores. In return, they carried back lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold dust from Nubia, and tales of peoples who drank wine in giant amphorae. With wealth flowing in multiple directions, social inequality crystallized. Nobles adorned themselves with bronze collars and inlaid stone jewelry. Commoners wore simple bone or clay beads. Kings decreed that only they could commission large bronze statues for temple facades. Artisans below the threshold crafted utilitarian tools. Thus, material culture became a mirror of status. The more bronze and carved stone you possessed, the closer you stood to power. Yet trade was fragile. A broken caravan meant famine for villages. A ship lost in storm meant silks, and metals vanished beneath waves. So polities negotiated treaties to safeguard merchants' oaths, inscribed on clay tablets, sealed with stylized cylinder stamps. Those diplomatic documents read like modern trade agreements: commitments to safe passage, arbitration clauses, penalties for theft. In this way, the dream of the first civilization embraced legalism as much as ritual. In marketplaces, rows of stalls glinted with potsherds and bronze spatulas. Scents of frankincense and fermented dates mingled in warm air. Traders shouted prices. Scale pans swung with weighted precision. Haggling echoed against mud brick walls. Amid that clamor, scribes noted each transaction on thin clay envelopes, feeding records into the communal archives that anchored urban memory. Beyond trade's bustle, artisans innovated. Metalworkers learned to craft bronze with higher tin ratios for decorative finery. Stone carvers refined shadow lines to give bas-reliefs uncanny depth. Gradually, the interplay of stone's permanence and metal's luster-shaped aesthetic canons. Sturdy mud brick walls adorned with shining inlays. Grand temples framed by bronze doors. Ceremonial chariots drawn in stone relief but crowned with metal fittings. Thus, the first civilization forged its identity in the crucible of stone, bronze, and trade. Material wealth underpinned social order. Craft and commerce wove distant lands into a single tapestry, and the dream of abundance, once seeded in wild fields, blossomed into cities of marble and metal. Each carved pillar, each bronze dagger, each merchant's ledger carried forward the vision that began with a single grain and grew into the sprawling promise of human achievement. Long after the hands that laid the first stones return to dust, their dream endures beneath shifting sands and rising waters. The echoes of that primordial vision ripple through time, carried in the pyramids of Giza, the ziggurats of Ur, and the broken stelae uncovered in desert tombs. Under Egypt's relentless sun, the Great Pyramid stands as a silent testament to a dream born in wild fields. Its limestone casing gleams like spilled grain at dawn. Its interior chambers aligned to stars that once guided ancient farmers' calendars. Pilgrims still trace its angles with fingertips, marveling at precision that transcends millennia. Within its shadow, modern scholars unearth tool scopper chisels, wooden sledge sekos of the craftsmen who carved blocks by candlelight and ceremony. Across the Fertile Crescent, the ruins of Ur's ziggurat rear skyward, a weathered ladder between earth and heaven. Archaeologists have found cuneiform tablets in the temple's debris, hymns addressed to Nana, god of the moon, imploring his light to bless the orchards below. In those verses, one hears the same awe as in Göbekli Tepe's pillars, a people convinced that carving stone could beckon the divine, that shaping earth could shape fate. In the ruins of Çatalhöyük, clusters of mud brick homes bear painted murals of wild cattle and labyrinthine hunt scenes, reminders that the shift from forager to farmer was not abrupt but gradual, a dream unfolding in layers. Beneath floorboards, archaeologists discovered caches of grain stored for ritual feasts, and buried beneath altars, children's offerings to fertility deities, tokens that echo the first kernels pressed into loam by trembling hands. Beyond the Near East, the Indus Valley cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro rose with grid-like precision, their streets carved by water channels and lined with baked bricks stamped by seals. Those seals bear images, unicorn figures, dancing priests, arrays of grains linking trade, ritual, and daily life in a single iconographic language. In their baths and granaries, one glimpses the culmination of that original covenant, Earth's bounty secured by human order, bound by belief and logistics. Time's currents carry the dream farther still. In the highlands of Peru, Andean farmers engineered terraced fields and irrigation canals centuries before, sculpting mountainsides into living temples of maize. In China's Yellow River Valley, millet and rice would follow, feeding dynasties that erected earthen pyramids in the emperor's honor. Across every continent, cultivated fields took on sacred contours, mounds, pyramids, step circles transforming natural landscapes into maps of human intention. Even in the modern world, the dream persists. We trace ancient field lines with satellite imagery, charting irrigation networks invisible from the ground. We decode cuneiform tablets in digital archives, bringing back voices that spoke to grain gods. We build museum reconstructions of mud brick temples and ziggurat models in glass cases, studying each fingerprint left by hands that once sang to barley sheaves beneath the moon. But the dream also warns us. Climate change melts glaciers that fed rivers once diverted by our ancestors' canals. Soil erosion follows monocrop fields, recalling the ancient farmers who learned to rotate plots and replenish nutrients. Modern cities sprawl over former granaries, their concrete foundations echoing the stone walls of early settlements. We harvest maize and wheat on scales unimaginable to the first cultivators, and yet hunger still stalks millions. In every seed saved in gene banks, in every effort to revive ancient farming practices, we honor the original vision. that human imagination could transform wild fields into abundant precincts of life. Archaeologists dig deeper, unearthing pestles and grinding stones that tell of nocturnal feasts, of shared bread consumed in the flicker of torches. Each fragment a blade of flint, a broken pot, a child's toy speaks of communities bound by earth and dream. And so, as twilight falls upon these ancient sites, you stand amid their ruins and feel the whispered lineage, the courage to plant seed, the faith to build stone, the wisdom to record in script, the gravity of covenant, the glory of trade, and the responsibility of stewardship. The first dream that birthed civilization is neither lost nor distant. It lives on in every furrow we turn, every granary we fill, every story we tell around the fire. In the fields of our own making, may we honor that legacy, cultivating not only crops but connection, building not only walls but wonder, trading not only goods but goodwill. For the dream began with a single grain, and in that humble kernel lies the promise of renewal, a call to remember that civilization is born wherever imagination meets the earth and wherever we dare to dream again.